more volume, Brian, from Aaron? Okay, Aaron, could you give me a little more volume on your end?
on my end.
Uh huh.
Let's see. Oh, okay. I was gonna see about another mic option, but it doesn't
We
look
can
like
do
I
it either way. I just was seeing if you could do it easily. I was gonna get you to turn yours up a little bit, but that's fine.
looks looks like it's up all the way.
Okay,
Is
that's
that any
fine.
better or not?
That's perfect.
Okay, sounds good.
Um, I'll get started. Okay, I can hear it better now, Brian, in my ear. We'll get um we'll get started, Aaron. Aaron, if you don't mind, what was your last name again?
Fur.
Fur. Okay,
Yeah, there's a whole
spell
bunch of
that.
extra R's and E's and things in there, but it's just say it like it's FUR, but it's
I got you.
FURRER, but just pronounced fur.
Okay, well we'll go ahead and get started. Aaron, thank you for joining us today on the Big Oak Land podcast. We're glad to have you and Gallagher explain to us about some exciting things going on in fencing in the country. It's a cattle raising and animal husbandry in general has become a new thing where technology intersects with the old ways. And from what I understand and talking with you in the past and talking with others, Gallagher is on the forefront of doing some exciting things with fencing.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you very much for having me, Robert. I certainly think that we're doing some pretty exciting things, and Gallagher obviously being around 88 plus years now, and effectively inventing electric fencing way back in the day, the brothers. So it's an exciting evolution in this space to be a part of.
Tell us a little bit about your background, Aaron.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from Washington State, what used to be a smaller town outside of Seattle, Washington, about an hour northeast towards the Cascade Mountains. Third generation on what was my grandparents' dairy farm. We grew up in 4-H, FFA, showing and breeding dairy cattle, but primarily raised beef on our property. So grew up selling locker meat, putting up hay and silage and all those fun things in the summer as well. And so that's really where my agricultural background, grew up using Gallagher fencing equipment here as we were grazing on the farm. And then ended up moving to New Zealand for about 9 years and just recently moved back to the US. And yeah, so good to be back on the home farm actually, where it all started.
When I initially talked to you a few weeks ago, I could tell that the accent that you've retained it as you've come back. How many years did you spend in New Zealand?
Yeah, I was there, got there in 2016 and came back to the States in 2025. So about 9 years all up. And my wife's from New Zealand as well. My wife's Kiwi, so I haven't quite escaped the accent. It definitely rubbed off on me.
People aren't aware. The beef industry is not just here in the United States. It's really a global economy of scale, and people, we're always we're kind of jaded here in the country because we have such a good um, beef industry and beef market, and it's kind of we've never have kind of went without here in the country. We have a lot of price fluctuations, but uh, that's some weird things going on right now in the beef economy, just because we're, from what I understand, a shortage of heifer or breeding stock is really what's going on. But people, I think, fail to realize how big the cattle industry is in the southern hemisphere, which that's New Zealand, the oceanic states, Australia, Uruguay, Paraguay, Argentina, some of Brazil. A lot of Brazil. But if you look at the southern hemisphere, I'd say it probably does more in cattle production than the northern hemisphere. Am I correct?
Yeah, it's management systems vary dramatically, how they manage cattle, raise cattle, but absolutely there's a lot of that production globally. I mean, Gallagher is in 150 countries globally. Shepherd's in 14, on cattle, on grazing cattle. So you're absolutely right. I mean, Argentina, Argentina steakhouses, right? They're known for their meat. The Brazilian as well. So there's a lot of cattle production in South America, as well as Australia, New Zealand, as you mentioned too, and different types of operations, different types of grazing operations and stock classes, and how they manage things. But definitely some large properties and large cattle numbers there as well.
Well, give us a brief introduction or background on Gallagher, and tell us a little bit about the history and how it was started as a company, some of the founding principles, and how you have evolved over the last 100 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Gallagher starting out with electric fencing is where it all began, and it's been continual innovation since. And that's innovation in posts and wires and energizers and all of that product range. But it started out with Joe the horse, and Joe the horse was a horse of the Gallagher family in New Zealand, and he kept rubbing on the family car. And so what the brothers did is they rigged up a system, hot wire, the first hot wire, um, put an electric current through it to keep Joe the horse from rubbing on the family car. And after they set that system up, they came by the next day. They could not find Joe anywhere. So the wire had been torn down, it was on the ground, but the horse was nowhere to be found. They did find Joe, and Joe never went back to that corner of the barn where they used to park the car again. So our energizers have been changed and refined since then, but that's kind of where it all began, was with that first electric fence and Joe the horse. And the brothers took it from there into manufacturing. So we do all of our own manufacturing. That manufacturing is done in New Zealand. We have a wide product range across energizers, animal performance and technology, liquid monitoring solutions. We also have a security side of the business. So our mission at Gallagher is to protect what matters most, and some of that stems from originally fences to keep cattle in, fences to keep people out. So we have two sides of the business actually, one on the security side and one on that animal management side with the fencing. And that's been the continual evolution, and that flows into the virtual fencing that we're doing today. We continually put money back into our R&D. What's the next innovation? How are we helping to protect what matters most, and continue to provide value to those people that rely on us? And yeah, it's amazing to see and amazing to be part of. And that innovation that the brothers originally had, and in New Zealand they call the number eight wire. It's that, what are the components we have? How do we make something work? It's always thinking about what's next. How do we make something easier, better? What are the core value drivers? And really taking that customer, that user point of view, and making sure that it's not just something shiny, it's not just something cool, but it really has value. We're adding into protecting what matters most: the land, your business, your livelihood, the intergenerational farms and ranches and everything that we work with. That's what it all comes down to.
Well, it's about products intersecting with land ownership and landowners and land stewards across the country. One interesting thing I learned with spending time in the southern hemisphere is that you don't see as much barbed wire in the southern hemisphere as you do in say the United States. And I would always ask the question, why is there not barbed wire? And they're more conscious of the hide or the for the leather industry in South America, from what I understand, and in New Zealand to that extent. Um, it seems like I would either see barbless wire or either like a Gallagher type system with a hot fence and charging. What's very interesting to me, and I think a lot of other listeners is there's several companies that have entered this sphere, but Gallagher has kind of been the forerunner on this GPS type geofencing or fencing by what's a better word for it?
The whole virtual fencing space. Yeah.
It's very interesting to see how, especially kind of the trend is heavy rotational grazing now, and people are getting away from a lot of the chemical based fertilizers, and they're more on a rotational basis, trying to keep their 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 bio their biosphere, bios or microbes, in their grasses, and they're rotating more. And it seems like this is a real interesting tool that can aid uh, cow calf operations or any type of cattle operations in their rotational grazing.
Yeah, you're right that there's quite a spread of customers and how they're using it and their motivations behind it. There's, amp grazing, rotational grazing, regenerative grazing. There's a lot of different terms, means slightly different things to different people, but generally it is looking at that land, pasture management, thinking about conservation, thinking about the soil, production, how that all feeds back, how cattle are this tool to improve the landscape, right? Because every farmer, every rancher I know, they're a steward of the land. They're thinking about the next generation. How do they continue that? How do they give back? And grazing and cattle can all be part of it. And so we see a massive range of use cases from highly intensive rotational grazing, New Zealand, Australia, well, New Zealand in particular, probably some of the best grazers in the world. And, there's a lot of different systems there, that strip grazing, intensive grazing. Techno systems is a grazing design system of really cell based defined area grazing. And then also you come out here to the US and the West, big country, and so they're doing rotational grazing, but the size of those areas is on a scale unlike what you might see in the intensive systems in New Zealand, just because it's a completely different environment. And in Nevada, the grass production, the forage production isn't as the same as it is in New Zealand, and so you have different stocking rates and densities and times that they're on certain areas and how you're moving them. But it is enabling that rotational grazing mindset, whether you've got small acreage and you're really intensive, or you've got really large acreage that maybe there was some cross fencing, some perimeter fencing that was barbed wire here in the States, as you said, but actually you're now to break that down into paddocks in a way that was, never possible in past generations because of the size and the labor intensity. And we have people managing it in completely different ways, and outcomes based grazing on public lands, looking at, when is that turnout date on some of these public allotments, and how are we helping to support those conservation, or sorry, those conversations to say, can we enter our turnout date on this earlier date because we can now exclude those areas that need more time to rest, to regenerate, whether that's higher elevations, whether that is from natural disasters, from fires. So the fires will burn down fencing, obviously vegetation as well. And so, how can we still utilize some of those areas because we can now virtually fence them off and manage them in a way that provides the right outcome for the land, for the soil, for the wildlife, for the public, for the cattle rancher, for everyone involved. We now have that flexibility on a scale that wasn't possible before, but also similar on the intensive operations, where how can they increase their intensity or their frequency of moves because there isn't that same labor component. They're not having to be out there and move the fence the same way. They can schedule these in through the app. um, they can go on vacation. The number of stories we have about people that are now present at family holidays or are finally taking a weekend off because they can open the computer, open their phone, and still see where the animals are at or still move that fence while they're away. And people that have cattle and have a day job. And so when they're in town at their day job and get the call that cows are out, they can look. One, they will have already gotten the notification if their cows did escape, or they can look and say, no, they're all where they're supposed to be. It must be the other neighbor. And they get that peace of mind and not having to run back to their home place.
Well, those of us that grew up handling cattle and as a family job in the summer, and then in the wintertime with feeding cows, you can appreciate, at least I did from my standpoint of having to fix fences on a couple thousand acres. Um, it's something that a tool that I look at is it makes life a whole lot easier, and it allows a cattle farmer to diversify, which his time is not so much tied up in mending or splicing fencing or going behind and fixing lanes or gaps or the myriad of things that can happen with rotten wire or cows getting out, calves jumping out. We all our calves getting hung up. We all know the problems, and we could probably do a show just on calves getting out, but it frees up the farmer to get out and kind of diversify his lifestyle, and he can do more things that can bring more diversification to his farm and his agricultural practices, where he's not so much of a monotone thing every day. He can add more things that he does in an agrarian landscape by freeing up his time. And I see that as, especially in the southeast, is where um, e shepherd can benefit a lot of farmers, cattle farmers especially.
Yeah, and some of those, winter storms. I know I was in Tennessee in February and big ice storms and everything that came through, and it takes some of that stress off of, what was the storm damage? Trees down, our animals out. How do we need to get out there and repair immediately? But with the virtual fencing, yep, perimeter fencing and everything, we still need to go look. We still need to assess, repair where we can, but there's not that same rush, not that same urgency. You're not in dire straits. And it doesn't mean that, you aren't out with your cattle as much. It can just change. And we hear this all the time. And, it's not taking the cowboy out of ranching, and it's not, removing you from going out and checking on your cattle. But when you're with your cattle, you can have that animal husbandry point of view, right? It's not just I'm out there moving the fence. It's I'm looking at my cattle, I'm looking at the grass, I'm looking at the soil, I'm understanding what my grazing impact has been, how I may need to change things going forward. Not that people weren't doing that in the past as well, but it's just how can you reorient your focus with the time you
A
have, as you're
hundred
saying, and what are those priorities? What's really driving value for you, your land, your cattle, your business, your family? If we can remove some of that fixing fence, untangling, and all those sorts of things that go with the territory of physical fence as well.
100%. The other night I really, I'm one of these night thinkers that I call myself working in the bed at night thinking about what this enables, the features that it can allow the landowner to utilize. And what it does is, when you're planning your work, like all farmers do the night before, they've got a plan laid out, and you don't have to so much focus on I'm going to get this job done. You can It gives you the perspective of stepping back and thinking, what is the best way to graze this type of land by not having to worry about going out there and doing a fencing job or a replacement job, but how I can divert and change running with the way of the land and the topography, instead of actually just having to put my mind on, driving post or stretching wire or putting staples in or putting braces in or setting posts. It takes so much of the thought process off of when you focus on the job and you're not able to actually think about what's the benefit of the animal, or what's the benefit of that livestock component, whether it's cattle, horses, goats, sheep. You can It really opens up a lot of possibilities, if you follow what I'm saying. And I think I don't want to confuse landowners, but it's like it opens up a whole door of possibilities to think outside of the box, literally.
Oh, you're 100% right. And I mean, I love those stories where someone comes so excited because they've just started thinking about their land differently, right? So different, whether it's livestock classes, land classes, that area that we couldn't put fence before, we can now graze on, right? Because it was too challenging to put fence, but we can now graze on it with virtual fencing. Or those areas that the cattle never really seem to utilize, actually we can get better utilization out of our other areas So we can retire that. Are we planting on it? Is that a carbon sink? How are we utilizing that in different ways, diversifying our revenue for our income from it, but not losing, not having to reduce cattle numbers, things like that, because you can just, as you said, start to think about your topography, your land differently, where your species, what could you fence, couldn't you fence. It's not just that, grid of fence that you're stringing out anymore. It's what shape can you imagine? Are there areas within that you want to exclude from a conservation point of view, whether that's water or pheasant habitat or anything like that, grouse and things. And there just becomes that flexibility. Or one thing I say as well is, you're out checking on cattle and side by side dies or something, right? Cattle love chewing and rubbing on stuff. You could actually put an exclusion zone around that digitally, right, so that it keeps them away from that until you come back out or someone else comes out, that sort of thing. So there become a whole bunch of different aspects when you start thinking about not just how do I put virtual physical fence out there, but how do I now manage the land, think about the land differently, because it is a different tool.
One thing that I thought about, and I'm thinking about land types. I know in Florida, people fail to realize like that South Florida and Florida in general is one of the bigger dairy industries in the country, and it's big cattle country, especially you get around Seminole Country, Lake Okeechobee, in that area. It's not just you know 100 acres or 200 acres there. We're talking six to 20,000 acre type range ranches, and especially in the Midwest, when you get into these bigger places, fencing is not so much of a thing as it is grazing and ranging and keeping up with cattle. But one thing I thought about in Florida that they often have a problem with is foot rot and blackleg, and because they get a lot of rain in those areas, but there are times where those areas don't get grazed because of standing water, but there are times where we get in drought scenarios where you want them grazed. So the feature I love about East Shepherd is you can change and geofence certain areas within your range or grazing structure of places that you don't want cattle at certain times. Whether if it's heavy water, it'll keep them out of those problem zone areas that'll can prevent sickness within and help maintain herd health, which I thought was pretty cool. And there's a lot of times where you get in those wetter areas where you'd like to have that grass, but they just won't graze it because of standing water, or you don't want them to, because of susceptibility to foot rot. But you get in a dry scenario, and you really want that area grazed, and you want your higher size to be able to grow. So it opens up so many possibilities, and gives you so many different opportunities that I think that the common cattle farmer or everyday cattle farmer really overlooks. It's not just today. It's not just turning them out there and we're reaping the profits from eating grass. I think we there's a lot to be gained in the way we graze and the techniques in that in itself. It's kind of a mind blowing epiphany for me to think of it when you really take the time and sit there and ponder on it. But I'm sure you've got millions of stories where landowners have had the same aha moments as I have with it.
Yeah, those are my favorite, is things that we haven't even thought of yet, that they've done a different design or a different management practice change that has had huge benefit. And that's what I love, is people that are really pushing the boundary, thinking different. And you're exactly right, that flexibility around, it's one physically fenced area, and I used to just turn them all in there, but is it too wet? Is there standing water? Am I keeping them off that? In plenty of parts of the country, in spring and winter and mud season, how do we reduce pugging and that sort of impact on the soil? How does that impact us long term in our grass production and those sorts of things? And so it's how you move them, how long they're spending on that particular area, when you're coming back to it, as you said as well. So just that timing. And then there's all everything from disease and pest and breaking using grazing to break fly cycles and reduce fly burden and things like
That's a
that.
cool concept. That is a very cool concept. We look at the science and technology is out there now, uh, to look at the fly counts. I mean, you follow what I'm saying. I don't know if a lot of our listeners I do, but the ratio of flies that you have around, and I was also thinking about how this opens up a world of possibilities of being able to move cattle out of these more uh, fly susceptible areas. More get them out of low lying areas, or one thing I thought of was also geofencing. When you're coming into the spring months and you're getting away from feeding hay and having to supplemental feed, getting them away from those feeding areas that you've utilized all winter. That's an area that it's just the herd mentality where if you're going to have any sickness, it's going to exchange there. But letting that kind of sit dormant there for, say a quarter or 2 quarters until you go back to use them. And it's just so many things that it opens up. And the fly thing in itself is just mind blowing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and winter grazing and everything. We've got a lot of people bale grazing, right? So all winter long, they're still using the neck bands to virtually fence. They've laid out bales. They're moving the cattle to new bales. It means that when the ground is frozen, they're not having to deal with trying to get posts into hard ground, or they're not having to set up everything ahead of time because they can just virtually fence and add as needed as well. But back to that fly aspect, great story from a customer. He does some custom grazing as well, so some of the cattle are his own. He actually has neck bands for virtually fencing the cattle that come in as well that other people own. And so the cattle that he didn't own, those owners wanted him to not move those cattle as frequently. So they were in the same area for a couple weeks at a time, kind of 2 to 3 weeks at a time, where he was moving his on pretty much the other side of the fence, same terrain, same vegetation, everything like that. He was moving them twice a day, or every 12 hours. And so what he was doing, he kind of had a watering point in the center, and then had a big wagon wheel that he was rotating through and around. And he noticed a dramatically different fly load between his cattle that he was moving frequently and the other cattle that weren't moving as frequently, just because they were always in the same area, you know, where the flies were breeding and multiplying, and they were all hanging around there. And he's even started to think, well, what does this season look like, right? I know that I can reduce it with that wagon wheel, but I still have that common point where they're coming to the water. I have multiple watering points. How do I set up, a trailing figure eight type structure so that they always have a water point, but it's a new water point, so that I'm actually breaking that cycle even further because there's not that same common congregation area. And so I'm really excited to see what this year holds for him as well, and the impact that'll make, which again, with the fencing to stretch the distances and make that figure eight pattern, wouldn't have been possible. But he's also on land that, was 15,000 acres. Is hard to intensively rotational graze with polywire. And so just what this opens up for him, and the complexity of shapes and movement of animals and everything like that, the value that he continues to get and continues to push the boundary and think in different ways each season.
What interests me, at first when I started wrapping my mind around East Shepherd, I was thinking, this is really a tool for, big range cattle for the Midwestern stocker, big areas. But then I got to thinking about it, and I'm like, the possibilities for a small, you know, young family that just has they're getting started out, they've just got just say 20 head and one bull, and they're really just getting started with their cow calf operation. It gives them opportunities to really utilize and maximize that smaller footprint, so they have 200 acres of grazing. It really opens up a world of possibilities for them to get innovative in the way they actually are raising their herd, from an early standpoint. It's a pretty cool concept, especially for first time cattle buyers getting into it. I think if they take this technology on from the get go, that they're going to evolve um, smarter, and they're going to be able to adjust quicker than people who have always done it just because that's the way dad did it or that's the way granddad did it. These first generation cattle owners are that are getting into it, if they will take on e-shepherd with the mindset of, let's use it and really stretch this thing out, they're going to learn that it's going to bring more options to them, and it's going to give them ways to pivot by going into it with an open mind. And talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, about how eShepherd actually works. We've talked, you and I, about the collaring system. Let's talk about the durability, the functionality, and the inner workings and interface with the actual shepherd and not the cattle itself.
Yeah, yeah. So I think just to touch on what you said about, people getting into buying cattle, getting into cattle in the first instance, that learning curve, the flexibility that virtual fencing has to begin with, right? You can spend a lot of money to put in some physical fence, but especially as you're on this learning journey, were those the right places to put it in to begin with? And we do have stories of people that are taking out grandpa's fencing that he put in because it doesn't make sense with how they can manage the land now. And that's a really important aspect. But the neck bands themselves, so not to discredit the technology that is within them, but Gallagher has been making solar energizers for a long time. And so in a way, they are a miniature solar energizer. They have two solar panels on them, one on each side, and then obviously there's audio tones and then a pulse if the animal is going outside of the bounds. And so we started in this space in 2015 actually, and so it's been a journey. We've had several different designs. Our original neckband designs actually started on top of the neck, and a lot of this thinking solar, right? There's solar, let's put some solar panels on top, put this on top of the neck. What we found through a few different on top designs was that neck shape, really customers wanted to manage all their cattle classes, right? So growing stock, mature cows, bulls, in different breeds. And so having an on top of neck design to maintain good contact on all those changing neck sizes and shapes. Plus, you have different coats from winter to summer. That insulation layer is effectively changing. So to provide that true flexibility, and then also in the situation where you're having it on growing stock, you want some flexibility for that animal to grow into it. You don't want to have to be adjusting it constantly. And so all those factors led to us having that kind of cowbell design where it sits underneath the cow's neck. So those chains, it's got a rubber strap on top with two locking clips in it. That rubber strap actually has a breakaway point built in so that if the cow does get hung up, they can pull out of it for welfare reasons. The cow's not stuck hung up. They can actually, it's meant to break, and then that's a replaceable piece. And then the chains come down the sides of the neck, which make your contact. So you get really good containment across breeds, bulls, cows, young stock, everything like that. Um, and then you've got the solar panels, the internal battery that is so that you can graze year round, right? Low light, cold conditions, all of that. You're not having to change batteries. You're not having containment issues. Obviously, there is a natural point that all battery technology can't get too cold. But we have grazed through the winters. We've got reports of 60 below with wind chill and everything, and there's still virtually fencing. And so, all that to say, you're not having to change the batteries on mature stock. You're not having to resize growing stock. Depending on growth rates, you may have to resize neck bands occasionally still, but all that is contained. And then we've got a lot of hardware packed into there, so that as we have future R&D, future algorithms to provide further insights, we just update that over the air. So whether that's a cellular, so if you have cell phone coverage, that's really easy. There's a cellular comms neckband, no infrastructure, anything like that. For larger, more challenging terrain, we've got a radio version. So you set the base stations up, they communicate to the neck bands from there. We've got a bit of flexibility and options, and a lot of flexibility in how people on larger properties are setting up those base stations to work best for their scale as well. And then those communications come back through you, whether it's through the mobile app or on the computer. You've got pretty much the same functionality between both. You can look at animals, you can select an animal or multiple animals and see their tracks, so see exactly where they've been. I know we have customers that use this to know that a certain cow is going to be calving at a time. They can see that they're off to the side. They click on her, they look at her tracks, they see that she's been there for quite a while. Then they can go out and check on her or tag the calf or do whatever they want to do in that scenario. You can see heat maps, so you can see where the most cattle are spending the most time in that given area over a period of time. We've had, fourth generation, fifth generation ranchers discover springs on their property they never knew existed because they were using the heat map and going, well, why are they all hanging out there so much? And then they're able to, in some cases, develop other water points and things like that. And so there's a whole range of use cases and features. You can schedule in when you want the next paddock to kick in. There's an offline functionality as well. So if you want it to remember the current paddock and the next one, it will then at that time roll over onto the next one automatically. They do also remember their their virtual boundary for a period of time for 24 hours without communicating with the network. So if there was, certain spots within the paddock that don't have cell phone coverage or don't have the radio coverage, they can go graze in those and come back and they still maintain the boundary and everything like that. So I mean, we can go on and on in terms of features and panic detection and return to paddock. So you get those escaped animal alerts. There's a feature that if they escape, you can turn on return to paddock, which is a way to encourage them, bring them back into the paddock where they should be, because that boundary is only one way. So they get discouraged from leaving it, but obviously we want to encourage them coming back in so they can come back in freely. And the best thing I think about virtual fencing is when one animal escapes, they're not taking down the fence to take the others with them. One gets
Mhm.
out, and the number of times we have people get that alert and they're doing something, and then they look again, 10 minutes, half hour, an hour later when they're ready to go out there and put her back in, she's already put herself back in. And they don't actually have to go out there.
And a lot of people that, if you're not cow people, a lot of it, the tear ups that you have in fencing is because of panic. It's not always the concept of grass is greener on the other side, them getting out. It's kind of a mask, uh, um, a by numbers issue when things get torn up.
Yeah.
One thing that I thought was pretty cool thinking about it is, you mentioned in conversation the other day, me and you just in passing, is that you can identify, especially cattlemen or cattle women who spend a lot of time and interact and actually know the personalities of their herds. You have, and if you would please echo me here and offer some color to this, but you have personalities uh, in cattle, in herds, of you have a dominant female who, she's going to calf what time of year, and she's kind of like a baseline for your herd health. She's gonna push newer cows to paddock. It's the whole mentality of the dominant female, and just in, if you want to start out with something as slow as not as finding your dominant cows in a herd and collaring them, you've got a lot of insight to be gleaned from just that. Things that you can learn about your herd, things that you can track, and if you don't want to go in such a big scale at one time and collar all of them, you can go as big or as small into this thing as you really want to.
Yeah, so for kind of the technical bits of it, we have a minimum order of 20, but absolutely 20 and beyond that for your first order, the minimum is 20. And then yeah, people don't always do their full herd at the same time. Um, doesn't necessarily work to try to only do some of the cattle and manage all of them virtually, right? You're only managing the ones with neck bands on, but it
Hmm.
means that if they have a grazing system for some, they can start with maybe their heifers, or maybe some of their cows, and then they can manage that to start to get into it, understand the system, understand how all that plays in and feeds in together. And you are right with that, lead cow, matriarch. We've got great videos of both for shifting that virtual fence, where there's that one cow, and I know we've got a couple here at home that they're always the first to get down on their knees and reach underneath the fence and that sort of thing. We're actually getting neck bands here at home in the next week or so, so I'm excited to get those on. But there's always that one cow that's pushing the line, that's checking on the grass, the greener grass on the other side. And so we see that with this as well. So they'll go up, they'll hear that audio, they'll know that the fence is still up, they'll turn around, and then when that time comes, they come up, they don't hear the audio. Okay, we've got new pasture. They take a couple steps, no audio, take a couple more steps, then they're on to the new green pasture where they start grazing. The others see her, and then they come up as well. No audio for them. Perfect. They step and then they move across that way. We have people that are now mixing, their cows and heifers and finding really, really good benefits to them being able to kind of teach and train the heifers coming in, both virtually fencing on rangeland, the lay of the land, everything like that, and they're able to combine these sets of animals. And even through winter and things like that, people that are combining different stock classes where maybe there's 80% overlap of the area they're both given, but maybe it's steers have access to like a wagon that they can feed out of, or a creep feeding aspect as well. Or younger stock, when you're grazing, going, okay, we actually want you to graze a little bit further than the cows so you can get the best stuff first without the competition of the cows. So I'm still kind of managing you in the same area, but I can still preferentially feed you as well. So there's a lot of those sorts of aspects that come into play, which are great to see how people are managing that, or manage herds of cows differently, but allow a bull to roam between the two herds because he's in a different, larger virtual fence.
I didn't think about the possibilities of tracking bulls and when they have to put their work pants on and in the spring, depending on if you're a a fall or spring calf. Or a lot of people these days are going to where it's continuous and they do both. So it
Yeah.
I didn't even think of the possibilities of tracking bull and bull performance. It'd be a good way in retrospect to look at his productivity and to see you know
And, and
and
we've
bull
had
health.
yeah.
Checking a bull, get a bad spot on his behind and get behind. And man, I kind of got overwhelmed the other night thinking about the possibilities of really what you could do with it.
And often hear that, because the groups of animals, the herds, when you assign them to different herds, they show up as different colors on the map as well. So even if people are running a bull or multiple bulls with cows, typically they keep in the same area, they keep them as a different herd because it's a different color. And yeah, plenty of times they'll look at the map and go, "Wait, why is he hanging out by the lake there? He should be up where all the cows are." Also had people, because they can now virtually fence, they're keeping everyone closer together. So they've actually reduced their bull team because everyone's not spread out so much. They can really target that a lot more. So there'll be lots more exciting things to come on kind of the animal insights, the animal health space, as everything continues there. All that technology is built into the product already. It's just a matter of finishing those algorithms, finishing the R&D projects and the research that we're doing to push those updates out wirelessly, and then they'll just turn up on people's apps and devices and ready to go to provide further insights, and how we start to combine the rest of the Gallagher ecosystem from animal weighing perspective, from a pasture, a water management, how all those things start to play in together and feed into this picture of, what are my goals? What are the actions that I'm actioning through this app as well? And then you get that feedback loop. So, what was the impact I wanted to have? What were the results? how might I need to change moving forward, and really being able to complete that feedback loop and adjust as you move through the season and between seasons.
You know what I also thought was kind of an added value with this is that, you know, we talk about beta or an R&D phase. I think, to echo a little bit about what you just said, I think it's never going to be an end. You know, it's always going to be an R&D. It's always going to be in beta because we're going to find new techniques. We're going to develop new trends. There are going to be new things to chase that we're not even we haven't even begun to scratch the surface on this from perspectives of looking at about how you can really utilize this. Think about the extent that the academic researchers are going to use this tool to be able to collect data. You know, the SKUs that you can place. One thing that I want you to touch on and explain to those, you know, like my father, he's just dangerous enough to turn the computer on. He's just dangerous enough to pull his credit card out and order something because it's cool. You know,
Yeah.
walk us through a little bit about helping people like my father's generation, who's 64, about, you know, they've done it since the late 60s, early 70s, and they're kind of making that transition. Do you have a team in place to kind of help them get over that learning curve and understand how your program works on the backside or the, you know, the back end?
Yeah, we've
I know it's overwhelming question, but
no, it's great. We've got some amazing stories. I mean, we have helped people purchase a computer. We have helped people get Wi-Fi to their homes where they're managing this system. And that might not sound like a great fit for a technology product for virtual fencing, but they've got that drive, they've got that interest. They're all willing and able to learn, and so there have been cases where we've really helped them. I don't even know if you can call that square one, right? That's square negative and 10. And so we've really helped people on that whole journey, and they're using it and they're loving it, and it's going really successfully for them. We have kids that have come back to ranches and farms and everything, looking at this new technology and how they want to manage it, and taking their parents along on that journey. And sometimes they're open to it, sometimes they're not, but the number of stories that we have of, now it's the kids telling parents to stop, get off their phone because they're just looking at where their cows are all the time. It's visibility they never had, and so they're really leaning into that and really enjoying it. And how it can keep you know the parents, the older generation, the previous generation, involved in ranching when mobility might be a bit harder and those sorts of things as well. They can still stay involved, which is great to see. And so we've got a customer success team. They are incredible. And so every customer we have goes through an onboarding. So we set up their accounts, we take a dedicated portion of time to walk through with them, answer all their questions, start drawing the first virtual paddocks, walk them through fitment, and understand all those aspects and their goals and tips and tricks, and really walk through that system with them to get them started. And then our team's always there. So we've got a phone number, we've got live chat through the mobile and the web app, and that email address. And we're very fortunate that we've got not only a great team here in North America, but in the Southern Hemisphere as well. And so when our team clocks off for the day, the team in the Southern Hemisphere is coming online. And so even if it's out of traditional business hours here, there's pretty much always someone on the other end of the phone if you call. Or now they do get busy, so they might not answer right away, but we'll return calls, and on the live chat and everything like that. So there's a fantastic team. I mean, I can't thank them enough for everything that they do to help get customers onboarded and help them with all their questions along the way. And some customers that you've alluded to take take more than one onboarding, but we're there for that journey, and we're there to make it a successful journey for them, and help them wherever we can.
Well, I think in all agriculture type product based companies, they have a higher cognitive ability, and for lack of a better word, patience, dealing with those that you know nobody's more stubborn than the farmer or the old rancher. So there is a little bit of a learning curve there, but from my experience with working with Gallagher, they have the patience and time to walk you through it and to help you in every aspect, even if it's helping you get over the hurdle of just getting Wi-Fi going through Starlink. I mean, the possibilities are endless, and if you got enough patience and enough time, you can really make some cool things happen out there. I'm excited about working with Gallagher moving forward. Uh, a partnership between Gallagher and Big Oak Land, and recommending and representing y'all in the Southeast. I think that's going to be a cool thing. I see a lot of opportunities for landowners and cattle raisers across the Southeast. And it's not just limited to cattle. There are people that are using this, especially in the southern hemisphere, for sheep, but also for equine uses. Can you talk a little bit about some of the equine uses that you're doing?
So we for Gallagher, for E Shepherd specifically, it is, we get lots of questions about small ruminants, so sheep and goats. We are, the work that we've done, the design that we've done, ethics and welfare things, and all those fun sorts of things. E Shepherd is just for cattle at the moment.
Mhm.
um, and we definitely get a lot of those small ruminant questions. But we're aware of it, but it's not quite at the moment. But there is virtual fencing for sheep and goats, absolutely.
Mhm.
And in the equine space as well, I think there's some really interesting opportunities here. And we have a partner in Spain actually that does quite a bit in the equine space, and with some of the location and tracking and everything like that. And I think there's more opportunity here in the states as well, from conversations I have with ranchers using it, and especially on some of those larger properties where they have substantial horse herds as well. And so they might be seasonal, might be out on big areas. And so being able to track them and everything like that, I think we're going to see more of that opportunity. Leveraging some of our partners around the world, and some of their products, and how we bring all those together to provide. It might not be the same eShepherd neckband, but how we help to provide those solutions, and tracking, and be able to know where the horses are. There's, from an equine or a wild equine perspective, we definitely have ranchers that are grazing on public lands that have wild horse herds. And so this is a really effective tool when those wild horse herds come through, for the rancher to say, hey, this impact wasn't for us, right? When the BLM, Forest Service, when we're looking at that outcomes based grazing, when we're looking at impact on public land, and see those grazing activities, it's a great way to start to look at the other species there. Okay, that was the wild horses that came through in that instance. Here's where our cattle were over this period of time. They weren't doing that grazing there. And it also extends to, because we're now virtually fencing, and in some instances, and on large properties or public lands, there's not that same you know cross fencing and everything. Herds of other wildlife, whether that's deer, elk, pronghorn, depending on where you're out at, that freedom of movement that they have to not navigate around the fences on those properties, becomes a really interesting. It's kind of a byproduct, right? We're not putting our neck bands on them to manage those movements, but as a byproduct of those movements, there's a lot more, from that holistic and wildlife and conservation and freedom of movement, and public lands, and hunting, or private landowners and hunting, and all those sorts of things. Um, you know, it's an endless, where the kind of spillover benefits of the product come into play as well.
Well, Aaron, to kind of bring our time together in conversation to a conclusion and closing, I'd kind of like to ask you to elaborate a little bit on, you made the comment of you'll never take the cowboy out of the cattle business. Well, a lot of those cowboys have evolved to be good businessmen, and you're never going to take the businessman out of the cattle industry. Let's talk about a little bit in closing about how e-shepherd compares and virtual fencing compares to traditional fencing as far as cost wise. What are some of these costs, and are there any programs like we see through the USDA on cost share to help subsidize some of these people who are interested in pursuing e-shepherd and virtual fencing as a new method in their farming toolbox?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, I mean, yeah, the price of physical fencing has definitely risen. For that can you can go down the rabbit hole on price comparison. Really, just depends on what setup you're looking at for from a physical fencing, but also what your goals are, right? And flexibility and that ability to change long term. Um, but for us, again, back to the customer insights, all the work we do with farmers, ranchers around the world. Our model is we're a purchase model, so you purchase that neck band, you own that, you depreciate that. It's a physical asset. You do what you want with it, and then there's a monthly data charge for the months that you're using it. So if you're not grazing year round, you're not paying that data charge year round, or if your herd size is fluctuating, you're not, heaven forbid, fires, things like that. If you're having to adjust your herd size because of some of those incidences or other factors going on, you're not paying for neck bands that you're not using or that aren't on animals. So you're only paying when you're using them. So that's very much the approach we've taken. Um, and then in terms of a cost share, there's quite a range of opportunities out there. So there's a lot of groups like Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, Audubon. A lot of those conservation groups have funding for fencing, for virtual fencing, and that cost share program, Equip as well, NRCS Equip program. There's we're obviously in the US, but up through Canada where we operate as well. There's a lot of funding up through Canada. So it is quite a wide range. That list goes on and on for regional to state to national organizations and the different levels that you can access it through. So there are definitely plenty of opportunities to, ask local conservation groups, extension offices, NRCS, anything like that, what options are available in your area because they are out there.
I always tell our listeners to reach out to your county extension. It is a great program across the United States that it really, I don't think people utilize it enough, but it is out there to help you, and it is in every county throughout the
Yeah.
country. Aaron, tell us a little bit about how our listeners can get in touch with you, can learn more about eShepherd, can learn more about virtual fencing. Tell us where they can go to get more education and to follow up with you and to potentially place their first order and or start the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So our website, eshepherd.com, is a great place to go. It's got all our information. It's actually getting a facelift next week. So it'll have a whole bunch more of exciting and insightful information on it as well in terms of events that we're going to be at, new feature releases. There's going to be a lot of great resources on there. There's customer stories and insights so you can see how people are using it, see who those people are, and hear the story from their mouth as well. So on that page, there's contact information. We've got a phone number and an email address and a contact form on the website. So a few different ways that you can get a hold of the team, and reach out. And we're more than happy to have that conversation, understand your operation, your grazing goals, how it will fit in, start to assess that cellular or LoRa, the radio version, depending on your property. And yeah, eshepherd.com or eshepherd.inquiries@gallagher.com is the email address. Yeah, people are more than welcome to reach out and get in touch and ask us any questions they might have.
Ladies and gentlemen, I can't think of a more innovative and effective tool than to start getting out there and learning more about this because I think this is the future, and this is something that it may look uh, bleeding edge or on the front side, but I think it'll be cutting edge and then become the norm very very soon, and especially will be more visible throughout the country. Aaron, I cannot thank you enough for spending your time today with Big Oak Land and discussing your products, and we're very thankful for your time, and thank you for everything that Gallagher has done for the agriculture business and for cowboys across the country.
Thank you very much, Robert. I really appreciate you having me on, and I'm very excited about this technology as well. And that's how I got into this space, was looking into it for our own cattle. And I think the sky's the limit. I'm excited to see where it goes. And yeah, just can't thank you enough for taking the time to reach out and have this conversation. And I look forward to continuing it.
Uh, just in closing, give us that website one more time, and how people can personally get in touch with you.
Yep. So that website is eshepherd.com. So that's ESHEPERD.com. And then the email address is eshepherd.inquiries@gallagher.com. And then let me grab the phone number as well that you can reach us on too, is 816-226-4484. So a few different ways for people to get in touch. And then there's always the contact form on the website as well.
Aaron, once again, thank you for your time. I look forward to speaking with you in the future, and I'll reach out in a few days and follow up with you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Robert. You have a great weekend.
You as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.